If you subscribe to my YouTube page, then you show up on a weekly basis for my knowledge and expertise. And one of the main areas where I get my knowledge from is other incredible coaches. And so on today's episode of the podcast, I'm interviewing Eddie Elliott. He's been on the WTA tour for 6 years with Lauren Davis. She's reached a career high ranking of 26 in the world. And we go on to talk about high percentage tennis, what type of baseline tactics are effective, what wins and loses pro matches, and his best advice for the 4-0 player. All right, Eddie, welcome to the pod.
Yeah, good to be here.
It's always great to have a coach like you on the show. You've been on the pro tour for a really long time. And I want to start with a super general question, but you've seen a ton of matches with Lauren. You've probably scouted her opponents. You've seen so many professional matches, different styles, different players. But what are some common things that people do that you think directly leads to winning a match?
It's a good question. I mean, that I always tell people is like when you look at the tour, you're looking at 100 players, and yeah, there are standards there, but they're all outliers in their own respect. So we as coaches, we try to pull a common ground from what all these players do to win matches. When you dive into it, reality is like each player is different in their own way. And sure, they do common things that we could kind of connect success to, playing high percentage, knowing their strengths, using their strengths against their opponent weaknesses. But it's super, as far as I've started to kind of realize the game, it's super individualized. And the more you can get that player to identify with what their game is, and obviously at the highest level that it's very minute, but you do have that time and rapport to kind of build that with a player. The better they understand their identity in how they play, the better that it shows in success on the court.
Do you have a definition? The term high percentage gets thrown out quite a bit. I use it all the time.
Yeah.
When you think of generic high percentage pro level tennis, like what does that mean to you?
That's a good question. High percentage. Like whether it's club level or pro level, there are still percentage plays that you should go for. Like it's part of the sport. If you're double folding too much or your first serve percentage is dropping, whether it's at the lowest level or the highest level, your opponents take a major advantage in that, especially if you don't have a huge serve where you can't risk as much. So percentage from that standpoint is like, are we making them play second serves? And there's a balance there because you want your player again to be imposing their will on the other opponent. The tour, you are rewarded in a way for risk. You have to play aggressive, especially the higher the level it gets. You're not going to get away with just putting the ball back in play. These guys are they're too good for that. But you still have to stay in the confines of, taking care of your first serves, being aggressive on your returns. And I don't know if that answers your question on what high percentage is, but that's it for me.
Yeah, it seems to be like there's a balance between even more so at the pro level, but the recreational level is like you've got to put the ball in play.
Yeah.
But you also can't just push it. I mean, if Lauren goes out and just hits 30-mile-an-hour ground stroke, she's going to lose 0-0. So how do you help a player find that right balance between you're hitting out, you're hitting aggressively, you are kind of imposing your will, like you said, but you're also not being reckless? Like, how can they find that balance?
So that starts to come to, I think, the communication between the player and coach, and finding terms or cues that work well for a player that they have a grasp on, that they can go to in high pressure situations, whether that's like aggressive to a big target, which I like to use that verbiage sometimes because you're not telling them to back off what they're doing, but you are telling them to hit to a bigger target. So you have that pressing, but you also have that percentage. And that verbiage is different for everyone from coach to player, but finding those cues um, uh, helps that player kind of maybe ground a bit. It's hard because we're talking so general, but it is important to understand that those are principles that if your player doesn't realize and they start going off the rails, or especially at the lower level, they keep trying to hammer the first serve. You don't want to tell them to slow down their serve. Maybe before you get to that point, maybe you go, hey, use your slice serve, put a little spin on it, give it some margin, but still go for it. And there's these levels that you can drop down. Like I could say the worst case scenario is like, hey, hit a big second serve. And if that's still not working, okay, hit your second serve. But there's these different levels that you can drop and still have your player press and play playing to win. If that makes sense.
It does. Bill Belichick had a line that I love, and I don't know if you think it applies to tennis or not, but he said if you want to start winning more, you got to learn how to lose less. And so, what are some things that you see from players on tour where you're like, oh God, like, of course she lost. She did this. Or are there some common traits, tactics, mentalities that you see where you're like, yeah, of course you're going to lose if you do those things?
100%. And I think the biggest one, tennis is like parents will come to me and they'll ask like, "What's the secret sauce?" There is no secret sauce. If there is any secret sauce, it is the basics hammered in and understood well from players. That sometimes it's an emotional maturity of a player understanding what they need to do in a match and not letting outside influences kind of spiral away. I would say most of the time when you hear these players make these big jumps or big ranking jumps or results, like very rarely have I ever heard a player said, "Oh, I practiced more." It's normally an individual that's spoken to their life, a mental coach. It has something to do with the mental side of them grounding in what type of player they are and being able to execute in some percentage of their potential. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So mental side is huge. It's obviously what I'm most interested in when people talk to me
Yeah.
about technique. I generally like, I know it's important, but I'm also not that curious about it. I'm more interested in the mental side. So Lauren is a pro. She's been around forever. She's very, very experienced. And so obviously what she works on technically would be differently than a 12-year-old or a 40-year-old adult who's just picking up the game. But what percentage of your time coaching centers around the mental side, whether it's tactics, emotional management, and how much of it revolves kind of around technique?
I think it depends. It's important to understand where you are in your season, and that will dictate how much of a percentage we allocate towards technique, tactical, mental. As the season goes on, there's not a lot that changes. Um, you definitely step into more of a managerial role, managing the emotions, managing the situation. You're creating an environment that best sets your player up for success. Where in the off season you have more freedom to maybe address certain issues that need time to maybe develop a little more of that skill. But in season, you don't have that much luxury. Sure, there's a week here, 2 weeks there that we can fine tune stuff, or even at a tournament, if she says, "Hey, this is a little off." But as far as like the chunk of adding skill, that's set aside for preseason. And as coaches, that's the really fun part because you kind of earn your keep there in a way, and then you have to jump into now more this mental role throughout the rest of the season, and you're constantly balancing different hats that you wear. But if I had to break it down simply, it's off season you have more luxury to work skill and tennis coaching, and in season is now more tactical, emotional, um, mental side of the game.
So how would you handle it? Let's take like Indian Wells, Miami. They're back to back.
Yeah,
You're in season, and Lauren or any player goes, "Man, my backhand feels terrible," or "This just doesn't feel good." And you can see there's something going on there. It's not just they
yeah,
had bad timing, they had a bad day, but you also have an event in 5 days. And so players deal with that all the time. You might have a league match on a Tuesday, and then you've got something on a Saturday, and people are trying to take a lesson and like fix their stroke in 3 days, which is impossible.
yeah,
So if you see something there, if you see a flaw, and there is a flaw legitimately, and it
yeah.
doesn't feel good, but you're also in the middle of competition, how would you handle that?
Good question. Let me preface this by saying is every player is different. So the solution that I would do with Lauren doesn't mean that that's a solution for X, Y, and Z, whoever I'm working with. Um, if I had to give the best general answer I could give is these pros are very good at changing things. And so sometimes we look at it at lens as coaches because the majority of players that we work with are lower level and skill development takes a while. Sometimes with the pro level, what I've seen is stuff can change really fast, and it could be literally one tune in 3 sets of feeding, and that's it. She's grabbed onto that, and so it's most of the time it's the mental side of why it doesn't feel good, not really the technical side. And the technical side, there might be a little tweak and it makes you feel better, and then it goes back to, okay, like what has led us to this point, what's going on mentally, so that we can kind of lock back in for next week.
I'm curious what you think about. I was like this as a player, but the feel that you have. And so I
Yeah,
just interviewed a strength coach, and he was saying players will tell them they feel faster, and he's like, "Well, cool, we can actually measure that. Like, I'm not really concerned how you feel. I want to know if you actually are faster." And a lot of times, a player might say their backhand feels bad, but then they're actually hitting it pretty damn well. And you're
yeah.
like, okay, like I respect that you feel that way, but what I'm watching, like since I can't feel your stroke, is
Yeah.
what I'm seeing is a beautiful backhand. So how much do you value player feel, and do you try to steer them away from that a little bit so they don't become so reliant, because that's going to come and go as the season progresses?
The most important thing as a coach is for us to listen. So you can't discredit that because that's the most important. Is even if they're hitting amazing, if they don't feel great when the competition comes, it doesn't matter. And it's our outside eyes to maybe reassure them either through video and be like, hey, if you don't believe my words, look at this. Like, you're playing great. And the more avenues you have to kind of buffer that or reassure them, which I think also takes rapport over time to build, uh, the more that they maybe will be like, okay, everything's fine. Like, it might not feel great, but my coach is saying, yeah, you're doing everything correct. So maybe it's extra nerves, maybe it's different anxiety, maybe it's worry about the future. So I would never push someone away from it unless it's leading to like a programming of, like being codependent on, I need to hit 2 hours a day or I can't play tennis. Like if it's leading to something like that, that's not healthy because you're good enough. And like we don't need a programming telling you if you don't do something, you're not good enough. Like the sport is already hard enough. You know what I mean?
Right. I get scared when players get their confidence from feel.
Yeah.
So, which I understand that, because like I said, I'm the same way. I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, because as a player, I would feel that way. But I would almost want more confidence and go, you know what? Mentally, I'm so great that even because I'm not going to feel good for whatever percentage of my matches,
Yeah.
that's what I really need to have, is that mental base. And then when I'm feeling good, oh my God, this is going to be easy. And when I'm
Yes.
feeling bad, it's like, great, I can go back to the cues you talked about, or my emotional composure, or just my ability to problem solve. And
And
that,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I would say in an ideal world, in a perfect scenario, that is the best formula. And I think at the highest level, they execute on that extremely well. Like they know that doesn't matter at the end of the day, they're coming out on top if they're playing good or not. And that's something to strive for. I think it's when you do get in those moments that you can't overcome and figuring out a way how to solve that when you're not playing good. Um, is again where a player can make a huge difference in their game. And what you're saying is exactly correct. Is like you don't want to rely on the feel. It's part of the game. So there is a dance that you have to acknowledge. Everyone loves to feel good when we're playing. Like, that's why we play tennis. If you play tennis and you never felt good, you probably wouldn't play the sport. But not every day you're going to feel good. And so it's how you manage those, um, really makes all the difference.
I always like to play devil's advocate with myself, but
Yeah.
like, so for one thing, for golf, for example, I actually think it's easier for me to play better golf when I feel bad. because
Okay.
when I feel bad, it's so much easier to be disciplined.
Yep.
So if I feel great, I think I can pull off any shot, and it usually leads me to trying really stupid stuff. And
Yep.
so I actually think the same thing applies for tennis. Like when someone feels good, one of my players, they might start slapping down the line when they're on the run, and they're like, "Well, I had it. It feels good." And it actually leads them to sometimes try riskier, lower percentage tennis. So that's like a trick that I use in my mind where, oh, it's a good thing that I don't feel great because now I'm
Yep.
going to play smarter today. And then when I feel great, I go, awesome, I feel good. This is what a great thing. So it's always a win for me. Um, I don't know if you see that, but I've noticed that with my players is when they feel good, actually, sometimes they get less disciplined.
So at that I see that with lower level players because they don't have a grasp on the spectrum of like what is really good, what is really bad. Where the higher levels, when they're feeling good, like I'm not pulling any breaks. Like when Lauren steps on court and things are ripping, the last thing I want to do is get in that way. Like go ahead, like have at it. If you want to rip winners inside out or down the line, especially with their backhand, go. But where you reel it in, and I think it's less, but if that starts to go awry, then what you're saying does happen, but just on a different level. Maybe it's a little minute. The lower level, you see it way more. But yeah,
So
I mean, I would just say at the highest level, when they lock in, there's been matches where like I just don't say anything. It's like, hey, that's exactly what needed to happen. Great job.
easy
Now,
day at the office.
yeah, exactly. You like those days.
Right. So you've been with Lauren for 6 years,
Yeah.
and you were talking about the rapport that you would have with a player and how they might trust your eyes instead of their feel. And at least from what I can tell on the outside, like tour coaches have a short shelf life. It's like the NFL, you're either hired or you're about to be fired. Like there's a lot of turnover, and I see players churning through it quickly. What is it about your coaching relationship with Lauren that has allowed you guys to endure ups, downs, injuries, successes, failures? How have you stayed together that long?
I think it comes down to both players being committed to growth. Like, I mean, I thought I was a good coach. Every year I make this joke of like, I thought I was a good coach. And then I look back and I'm like, man, I can be better. And the same thing is with the player. And like when you grow together, it allows growth for everyone. Bottom line is as coaches, if you aren't setting up success for your player, you're not doing your job. And so you have to be able to look. And sometimes the hard truth is maybe it's not a good match. And like that's when the maturity needs to come in because I'm a firm believer that if there's 10 players, I'm going to coach them 10 different ways and with the same principles. But realistically, maybe our personalities only allow, maybe I can only work with 7 of them. Maybe I can only work with 4 of them. And you have to be mature enough and that there's a little luck that is involved in any type of relationship that you cultivate over time. I think another good thing to understand is like success comes with consistency and the sport like the sport of tennis values consistency and you look at the top teams, they've been with their teams a long time and when they make that change they're with that next chapter for a long time and when you start flip-flopping too much you see it directly impact the players and their success. I've yet to see someone flip flop and have great success. It's like because it's too hard a sport and you break that stability. It's a tough sport just in general of like the lifestyle that you live out there. It's you got to have a team around you that you feel good doing what you love. You know what I mean?
Right. When you talk about thinking you were a good coach, like basically every episode I record, I'm always
Yeah.
like, how have I never heard that? Like, I'm like constantly looking for information. I thought I was a good coach, and then you'll say something. I'm like, that I've never heard it worded that way. And so I'm always learning something. I finish every episode, and that's why I like the podcast. I'm going to put you on the spot, but what is something that you feel like you picked up this season, 2024, where you're like, man, 2023, Eddie didn't know that, but now I feel like I've grown a little bit or seen the game a little differently.
From 2023 2024, well, I would say currently I'm in a learning phase right now. I've never had a player be injured for a long chunk of time, so there's been a lot of growth now. That looking back of how we dealt with it, how we set up scheduling. I probably would have been maybe a little tougher on a few on tournament scheduling of how we got back into things. But at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that the player needs to make that decision because the player holds the racket, the player holds the trophy, and that's always been consistent of how I looked at coaches. Growing up, I've had a couple coaches that were almost like too personal, like they were the player, and I never felt good about that. And going into the tour, people are like, "Oh, you coach on tour and you get these titles, WTA, whatever." Like that's the last thing that I want my player to feel because it doesn't help them. Um, and it takes the focus away from them, puts it on you. When if they succeed, you succeed. Simple as that. Um, so as far as like learning from last year to this year, uh, I would say I'm kind of in that process right now. There's things that I'm mulling over. It's off season right now, so maybe we'll talk again in a year and I can give you a more concrete answer.
Yeah, I would love that. So one thing with, I mean, it's on the men's tour as well, but WTA, there's obviously a lot of baseline rallies. I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's probably the bulk. Obviously, you have serve return, baseline rallies. Some girls come to the net a little more than others, but it's not a huge piece of the pie. So, what are some things that you see in general on the pro tour in terms of baseline tactics that are successful? What are a lot of players doing? What do they value? And I know we all said they're individuals, so some players might hit faster than others. Some players hit more spin. But are there any generic tactics or fundamentals that kind of lead to baseline success?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think the biggest growth for women's sports is variation. Is there are girls that are really good at their game, and but I think where the sport is going, and you do see more players playing it, and similar to the guys' game, is there's more girls playing with heavier ball that can flatten out, that has a good slice, that have good angles. I mean, you look. I loved watching Ash Barty play when she played, and she played like a guy. And I think there's more of a generation. Lauren plays like it's funny because Lauren is small, um, but she plays with a ton of our variety. Play and she loves clay court, but she also loves grass. They're two opposite type of game styles, and she molds both really well because she can get the ball up, she can use the slice, she can play flat, she can play close to the line, she can play back to the line, and I think more girls doing that will lead to more success. Again, it's dependent on their personality and their game style. But if I had to like grow a generation of players up, that's what I would be developing.
Is there any element of the ball that you value more? So, generally speaking, if you said, as a principal, I value depth, or I value speed, or I value spin, or I value control, what is the element of the baseline stroke, the actual ball coming at them, that you value the most as a coach?
So that's interesting because I do this with young players. I'll go, hey, now I want to see you hit these balls deep. And 99% of players just start hitting harder every single time. And I value the idea of you can hit your same ball, just elevate your clearance, like higher clearancy over the net. Same ball. Just based off the trajectory of the ball, it's going to land deeper. And a player's ability to play with that higher, lower over the net is really, and that feel, that's kind of what I value. Oh, you're far back in the back court. Why are you going to hit it hard and flat over the net? You're way out of position. Hit a heavier ball to give yourself back time to get into the court. Oh, but you're inside the net or inside the court. Okay, go for it. But that feel is maybe that like high percentage feel of, when I watch a player that really understands the court. Um, they play that most of the time, and then at the highest level, they have X factors that they can hit. Like we can watch anyone and they can hit winners anywhere on the court. That's always going to be there, but the majority of the time, they're making good decisions.
So I'm going to share my opinion after you tell me
Yeah.
yours. I don't want to color you, but you just said something that jogged my memory. So When let's say you walk by a local club right now and you see a junior or you see an adult, what is the first thing that you look at or that would kind of make you have an opinion where you go, oh, like that's a pretty good player there, or the opposite? What is the first thing that stands out when you see a new player and then kind of thin slice and judge the quality of who they are as a player?
Footwork, number one. Yeah, how they're approaching the ball, just their footwork. I mean, everyone's got an opinion on strike and out in front, etc. Unit turn, whatever you want to throw out. But if you have good footwork and you're moving correctly on court, it takes care of most of everything. And so when I see juniors that move well, I'm like, oh, okay. Um, that's probably number one.
I love that. So the one thing sometimes people will say consistency, they'll say control. I personally love footwork. That's an amazing one. What usually doesn't get said is pace. Because I'm like, oh, like anyone, like I can bring a baseball player out right now who's never played tennis, and they
Yeah,
could probably hit the ball pretty fast. But
yeah,
I do feel like the lower the level, that is actually what's valued the most, is how hard they hit.
yes. It's the sexy thing. Oh, I
Right.
hit it so hard. Oh, get the radar gun out. Let me see how fast my serve is. It's great. Like, but you know, everyone on tour hits the ball pretty hard. It's not like, you know, everyone's a good player. That's not really what separates them. There's girls that hit the ball extremely hard that aren't ranked that high. The pace doesn't really do it. And again, that pace, not understood, right into a girl's wheelhouse is like the easiest ball ever.
Right.
So when we talk about depth, it's like, oh, great, you're hitting it deep, but it's flat right into hip striking distance. They're just going to hit it to open court. Goodbye. Like
Yeah.
that's where pace kind of drops down as far as priority.
So we're gonna get in some Instagram questions.
Yeah.
This first person wanted to know, like, now that you can coach in a match, what are the things that you would maybe say to a player when things are going against them?
Oh, good question. Again, um, there's so many things that you could say. Uh, a lot of times it's past cues that you've already established with the player that if that's the reason things aren't going great, you could say to a player. Sometimes it's like just keep doing what you're doing. Maybe the girl's playing really good, but stay the course. Like they just need to hear like, hey, you're playing good. She's hot for a second, but maybe she can't maintain that for 2 sets. So don't panic. Just keep playing your game. Um, yeah, because there could be so many variables to what I'm seeing in a match versus maybe someone else seeing, and you hope that you're seeing the right thing. I've made wrong decisions as well, telling Lauren certain things and then being like, that's not what she needed to hear in the moment. So,
Well, maybe I'm getting in my own head as a coach, but at least recently, this maybe I'm a terrible coach and this is why it works, but recently I say less in these situations. I used to say more, and then I'm like, whether I just didn't know what to say or I was angry or whatever, when I said nothing, usually things kind of work themselves out anyway. So what I have to offer wasn't really helping to begin with. But do you see that at all too? Where if you're on the fence, you're like, you know what, I'll just say nothing and see what happens.
100%. There, um, the best coaching advice is don't overcoach. Like they're already pros. They're already way better. Like most coaches, the players are way better tennis players. You've observed the sport, you've studied the sport, but they are professional for a reason. Um, there are the one-off risky stuff that sometimes you say that snaps them out of something or gives them, but generally, like less is more. They know how to handle it. Giving them that maybe reassurance and confidence and not saying too much will solve a lot of things out there.
Next question. What is the best coaching advice that you've ever received?
Don't overcoach.
I gotta
Yeah.
get I gotta get a second one now.
Um, I just had a good one. Um, let me, and it should come. Let me think about this.
Yeah.
Best coaching advice.
If you'd like to
Uh,
share more than one, you can, because I know picking one thing, it's like picking your favorite movie. It's
yeah, yeah,
difficult.
yeah. Like, how do I pick between Shawshank Redemption and Batman Returns or something
Right.
like that? Um,
Exactly.
uh, I mean, just a couple that come to mind. Man, without sounding like hammer the basics, make the basics will make you a better player. Like just understanding the basics, not getting too wrapped up in everything else. Um, I can, it's hard. I can take this from a couple different ways. From a coaching perspective, I guess I could say as a coach, never, never be too good to learn, because at every level you can learn something. And then also never be too good to coach anyone. The if you can coach from the beginner all the way to the pro level, you have a great understanding. You don't have to be the best at anything, but you have a great understanding of what that pathway looks like. I mean, I hear, coaches, oh, I just want to work with high performance. Great. Whoever you have now, make them high performance. That's a good coach. And and you can learn a lot from understanding the basics. You can make more mistakes at the lower level, and then you can kind of figure out and fine tune your coaching. Because when you get into the high performance, like pros call you out on your thing. You can't just say something because it sounds good. They want to know why. Oh, and this is what I learned with Lauren is like, I would say something, maybe we're working, and it's just something I've heard over the years, and she's like, why? They're very efficient on how they work. So if you tell them something, you better have a reason why you're telling them something.
One thing I'll do is not in a bad way, but if let's say I learn a new way to say something,
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by psychology. So let's say, oh, if you say it this way, players are more receptive. I will always start that process with my lowest level player. So, or someone I just met, I go, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to say it this way
Yeah.
and see what they think before I maybe go to your Lauren or someone like that and go, hey, I'm not just going to throw something out here to the pro. I'm going to see how this works and see if, hey, did that work well? Oh, it didn't. Why not? And get the feedback. So there's definitely a value to coaching all levels. And then you can also see what types of things resonate only with a beginner, but not with a pro. And some things only resonate with a pro and not the beginner.
100%. And that's probably when I described, like, you think you're a good coach, but then the next year you look back and you're not a good coach, and you're like, dang, well, I think I'm a good coach this year. That process is only found through experience of time, and keep looking back, what works, what doesn't work, what works, what doesn't work. Where you're just fine tuning your craft as a coach. Whether it's tennis or anything, the art of coaching and giving someone the ability to be successful at what they do.
What is something that people don't know about the WTA tour?
Um,
Can be anything. Can be about the level of play, the type of play. It can be what day-to-day life is like. What is just something that people don't really understand about pro tennis that you maybe uniquely have access to?
the players focus. Everyone sees practices. Everyone thinks they practice focused. Like all these girls, comparative to the lower level, like most of them don't know what a real practice is. Most of them don't know that when a player locks in, like they are locked in. Um, they just view it as like tennis practice is tennis practice. And there's such a big difference from not skill, but like mental focus from high level to low level, that it's a hard thing to observe until you're actually in it. Um, and that's part of as a coach trying to kind of fast track that and give it to a player. But a lot of times I find that like some players either have it or don't, and that's why that's what makes them successful.
And last question, most of my listeners are adult recreational players.
Okay.
What would your single best advice be for the 4-0 adult player?
Um, I can hit a couple real quick. Low hanging fruit. Low hanging fruit. Uh, if you miss more than two first serves in a row, make your third first serve, whatever that means to you. Keep pressure with first serves. If you miss two returns in a row, make sure that you don't hit it in the net. you're going deep and miss it a different way. Try not to make the same mistake twice. So I know that's random, but like it helps clean up the game at that level. Oh, I missed my first serve once. I missed my first serve twice. Guess what? The rest of the game, go to your staple and get the match rolling. Because most at that level, and you know more than me, most of those matches is players losing to themselves versus the actual game of like losing to someone else. It's like who is not gonna lose in a weird way.
Absolutely. It's a race to lose, and
Yeah.
it absolutely is. And it's like players will tell me, "Oh, I just couldn't get the ball over the net." You know, they'll say, "Oh, I just hit so many forehands in the net for 2 sets."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "You really couldn't hit it over the 3 foot?" Like, I know right now I could feed you a ball for $1 million and you get it over the net.
100%.
Maybe you can't get it over the net and get enough topspin to bring it down, but we don't even know if that's a problem because you never even went there.
Yep.
So
Exactly. Be
it,
willing to fail forward.
absolutely love that. Eddie, can't thank you enough. I know you're in the off season. You've had a busy year. Good luck to you and Lauren in 2025. And hopefully we'll do another podcast next year this time, and you can tell me what you learned from 24 and 25.
I would love it. Thanks, man.